Welcome to This Must Be the Place. I'm your host, Alo Galinsky. Each week, I'll uncover what's happening in Sonoma County, diving into the hidden gems and quirky corners. I'll be interviewing some of our local legends, as well as people you didn't know you need to know, all through the eyes of a craft beer enthusiast living in wine country. Join me as we explore one sip, one story, and one adventure at a time, and together we'll find out why this must be the place. Today we're joined by Scott Lipanovich, a Santa Rosa-based author whose evocative mystery novels are putting Northern California's stunning and sometimes treacherous landscapes on the map. A former college library professional and writer whose short stories have appeared in numerous literary journals worldwide, Scott brings a deep appreciation for locale to his work. He is best known for his compelling Jeff Taylor mystery series, which includes The Lost Coast, The Golden Ceiling, Sky Lake, and his latest release, West County. On a foggy West County morning here in Sebastopol, we're going to dive into his writing process, how he creates his mysteries, and the inspiration behind using the dramatic California landscape as more than just a backdrop. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Alo. Good to be here.
It's great to have you on our podcast. I'm sure a lot of our listeners who reside in West County and Sonoma County at large will be really interested to hear your process and hear a little bit more behind the novel. But first, it would be great to get a taste for the book itself. Can you start us off with a reading from Chapter 1?
West County, Chapter 1. Spring came early to Sonoma County, and nature threw a party. Each plant and tree hastened to rise from the earth and claim its share of paradise. The bright greens at the tips of new growth were downright intoxicating. It was my first spring in the region, and I was dazzled. Everywhere I walked, everywhere I drove, brought feelings of endless possibilities, feelings of good things to come. 2 hummingbirds flitted, branch to branch, wings purring. Tiny green torsos sparkled under crisp sunlight. A red spot shone at each throat. The birds hovered on adjacent branches of a mature lilac bush. A hushing wind joined the birds' purring. It occurred to me it was possible they may not be hummingbirds, that to untrained eyes they could be little creatures that looked like hummingbirds. Living in a region that was profoundly fecund, of late I'd realized how little I knew about the natural world. Did that mean I knew little about life? I did know that where I stood held magic. Sunspot, a secluded nature preserve 70 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge, 3 miles in from the sea. I viewed distant, tree-covered ridges, the mouth of Tamales Bay, and Point Reyes National Seashore. Cream-colored clouds with silver bellies drifted slowly landward like ships floating in the sky. Checking my phone showed that 10 minutes had passed. I walked to the center of a grass field. "Bianca," I called. "I give up. You can come out now." Bianca Vasquez, 9 years old. She liked to see how long she could keep me searching in games of hide-and-seek. I hadn't searched at all. It was more fun to stroll the upper grounds at Sunspot and take in the landscape. "Bianca, you win. Come on out." I checked the usual hiding places on the preserve's mesa-like hub, around the corners of wood buildings gray from years of drenching fog, alternating with sunshine. I checked the garden, the rectangular greenhouse, a communal kitchen eating area that was open to the land at one end. Bianca, a strong runner, could cover a lot of ground in 10 minutes. She'd been out of sight for more than 15. "Bianca!" A hint of desperation seeped into my voice. "It's time to go." I jogged across the grass to a bench placed at where a trail began, a looping trail that went up and then down a green hillside. Behind the bench, wild grass grew tall enough for someone as diminutive as Bianca to hide in. "Bianca!" Every Saturday I watched Bianca from noon until 4, giving Inez, her mom, some free hours from single parenting duties. Inez was executive director of the public health clinic where I worked, and my lover. "Bianca, hey, where are you?"
Thank you, Scott. That was terrific. We always like to get a little bit of a background on our guest before we dive into the topic at hand. So why don't I go ahead and just ask you, how did you get your start in writing?
Well, when I was a senior in high school, you had to take 5 classes, and I had taken everything that was needed. So in the spring semester, I signed up for creative writing with Ms. Johnson. And I guess I got me started. And she was terrific. She was a wonderful teacher in many ways. And I went to Sacramento State and I was there for 2 years. And after 2 years, I kept thinking about in Miss Johnson's class, a writer from the Philippines, LVM Gonzalez, he was the most famous writer from the Philippines in those days, had spoken in our class. And I thought, you know what? I'm kind of bored here in Sacramento. I'm going to transfer and take classes from Gonzalez. So I did. I transferred and I looked him up. I found him in his office and he was packing. And he said, "Could you help me pack?" I said, "Well, sure." And he said, "I'm leaving for Seattle today. I just got appointed a visiting professorship for the year." So I went to Cal State Hayward, now Cal State East Bay, to take classes from Gonzalez, but I never did. He went to Seattle and we never crossed paths again. However, when I was at Cal State Hayward, I did start to write a little bit. And then I put it aside until my latter 20s, and that's when I started publishing short stories.
Very cool. Did you really enjoy digging into short stories to begin with, or was it like a medium that you were unfamiliar with?
I'd say it was really all I was capable of. The idea of writing a novel in those days, for me anyway, was not there. And I started publishing stories in what was called Ridge Review, which came out of Mendocino. And they published three of my stories in my latter 20s. And I kept at it with the stories. And then one of the stories that was published in the Ridge Review was called Moonlight. And it was about a state senator who's driving up the coast in the middle of the night. And he's been drinking, though he's not really drunk. And he runs over somebody with his car. And it turns out it was a setup. But that was a short story. And then later on, I thought, there's a whole novel there. There's a whole book there, is what I thought. And that's where The Lost Coast came from.
Well, I can't wait to dig into the crux of A Lost Coast shortly. As you and I have something in common, I actually studied creative writing in college myself at San Francisco State, so just across the bay from Cal State East Bay. I focused on playwriting, though. I wanted to originally be a Broadway lyricist, was kind of my hopes and dreams. So I do appreciate the structure of a good plot, of a good setup, and I think it's fascinating to hear the process behind what goes on from the pen to paper, or I suppose the fingers to keyboard, as it may be in the more modern day now. So what would you say is the most challenging part of the writing process for you?
Oh, definitely the plot. I'm most interested in people and very interested in place. And I feel that I can, characters come to me pretty well, pretty clearly. I hear their voices, and I'm always somewhat obsessed with place. With the plot, I'm not good at red herrings and tricks and that kind of thing. I also consciously tried to make these four mysteries not souped up on violence and cheap, what I think of as kind of cheap shots. So the toughest part for me is the plot. So, for example, with West County, it was 2 years after Sky Lake, and that's because I couldn't get the darn thing right. I ended up doing 6 drafts front to back, cutting 35 pages.
It's really great because what I got a sense of while reading your book was, as you said, that sense of place first and foremost, but also these lively characters. And it's funny, as I said, growing up in Sebastopol and reading a book that's largely set in the town of, well, you call it Appleton, which is based on Sebastopol, I kept trying to think, who do I know that reminds me of some of these characters, the hardware store owner or the woman at the diner? And you give such vivid voice to the characters like Inez, Jeff, obviously, but then Odin as well. I kept thinking, who do I know that lives out in Coleman Valley Road or Burnside that might, be some of these characters that I've met in my years growing up in Sebastopol? But I haven't spent a lot of my adulthood here, so the nefarious character types I might not be as familiar with.
All the characters are made up. However, a couple of them are based on guys that I've known. The Odin character is based on a guy, I won't give his name, but he used to live outside of Forestville years ago. He's in Southern California now. But he is Scandinavian, like as Odin is in the book. And then the Shannon Lunge character, I almost said his real name, is based on a fellow I knew named Shannon, who passed away. But he had that super large neck and jowls, and he talked fast and he talked loud, and he came across as a real tough guy, and he was actually a tough guy but also a real nice guy. So those two do come from characters in West County, and of course the places do, but people wise it's just those two, and the rest are made up.
Now, what is it about West Sonoma County that you thought it would lend itself to the mystery genre in particular?
first of all, it's so varied. You've got redwoods, you've got pastoral scenes, of course, you have the coast, you've got the lower Russian River, you got everything. So that allows a writer to move around a lot. You want to keep your story moving. There's also when you get across the river, I'm not sure if all your listeners will get this, but anyway, when you get north of the Russian River and you get into the hills there, there's an endless number of winding roads where you can't quite see where they're going. Some of them become unpaved, then paved, then unpaved. And to me, that there's always a kind of a mystery driving up in those hills, especially the first 10 years or so I lived in the county when I was in Forestville. I'd often just get in the car, drive, go up Myers Grade, called Bishop Grade in the novel, and just drive these mysterious roads. And so when I started writing West County, they came to mind. The characters tended to be there and not, say, in Sebastopol and Occidental.
Now, your protagonist has had quite the arc. He was a former pro basketball player. He was a PI, and now he pops up as a doctor at a West County health center. What made you inspired to write such a unique background for Jeff Taylor and center a series around him? And also, was it always meant to be a series, or did it build off ideas and successes from the previous novels?
After I wrote The Lost Coast, it did pretty well, and people liked it. And I had a lousy screenplay that I'd written years before. But in it were two old, very old gold miners, and they were interesting characters. And they were really the only parts of the screenplay I think that held up. And so I thought, well, I can take those two guys and I can make a novel that's based on looking for some gold. And the golden ceiling is about gold that's been hidden. I won't try to give the plot away or try to explain it. But to answer your question, no, I wasn't thinking a series when I wrote The Lost Coast. But after it did pretty well, I thought, I can use this Jeff Taylor guy. Now, as to Jeff, there was a guy that I grew up with whose father was going to go to medical school. And he lost all four fingers of his hand in a thresher. I'm not sure it was a thresher, some kind of machine in harvesting in the valley to make money before he started medical school. And, in mysteries, kind of like old Westerns, although quite often it's the injured hero. It's the person that, can't see in the left eye, so something happens on that side. And so I thought, what if we give Jeff Judge Phillips's hand, that hand which haunted him because he was going to go to medical school and he lost his fingers. In his case, he became an attorney and then a judge. Jeff didn't go to medical school. He became a PI because he was just, after his hand was damaged, he was just destroyed. And then later on in the series, when you get to the third book, it starts in the second book and gets completed in the third book. He does go to medical school and he does become a doctor. So I thought that having him not be able to go to medical school in the beginning of these books and becoming a PI was something that seemed quite natural to me because he felt like a freak, that he called it the damnable hand, was always there and he was always aware of it. So in the first books, although quite often he puts his hands in his pocket when he meets somebody so they don't see the chopped hand. If he's doing something official, he's in a police station or something, he makes sure that his hand isn't seen because he doesn't want to distract from things. As far as Jeff in the last book in West County, I wanted him to be a good doctor, to have finally come through after all his struggles in the first three books.
Well, it sounds like I'm going to have to go back and read those books to see the evolution of Jeff Taylor myself, because it was really cool to see how well he took care of people and also seemed to really be needed by people. He liked to be wanted and needed by the house calls he was making and also his relationship with Inez. And I think you captured that in a couple different conversations he had.
But he was pretty insecure besides the hand because of his upbringing. Mm-hmm. I'll just say he didn't know his father. And so it seemed to me that Jeff would be the kind of person who would really reach out to others because he both wants to give, but he wants to be needed.
That makes sense. And you have to have these complex characters who battle both sides of the coin, so to speak.
Yeah. We've all read mysteries or any kind of novel where it's just too simple, you know?
And other than obviously living in and spending a lot of time in Sonoma County and West County, was there anything that inspired this particular book? Are there real life events or any aspects of true crime stories that influenced your writing?
No true crime stories that influenced the writing, but the back to place. I thought if I'm going to write a book set in West County, I need to put Luther Burbank in there because the Burbank Experiment Farm, which coincidentally I was minimally involved in when it was cleaned up in the early 1980s, which I was kind of around it, and I thought that was a part of the area that's very important. And there is Sunspot, the place that where the book opens, which used to be called Ocean Song, and it is a place that always inspired me. And I would go back there alone or with someone else from the early 1980s until it's kind of closed off now. But 40 years.
Sure.
And those are more than people and more than events. Those are the things that really drove me to try to bring this place alive. It's one thing to say Sonoma County is very beautiful. It's got trees, it's got ocean, it's all that stuff. But to really bring it alive takes more than that. And I wanted the book to bring Western Sonoma County alive for the reader.
And you really did that. I mean, you do have such a great ability to capture a sense of place, but also community in the book. You set scenes, obviously, at Sunspot, which is funny that I actually went and Googled, some of these places. I did do a Google search to see if they are hidden gems in my own backyard. And obviously, Sunspot didn't come up because you had renamed it. But, you have the community health center, the hardware store, the diner, as well as the great winding roads and back roads of the outdoors. Was there anything in particular that drew you to capture these specific settings in what you call Appleton and beyond?
But when I'm writing, sometimes the characters, he's going to go to dinner. Note he goes alone. He's still kind of a loner. And he goes to this place called Homer's Cafe, which is filled with other people who maybe aren't the most sociable. And so I made that up. That's completely made up. Now, when it comes to Forester Park, which is obviously Ives Park in Sebastopol, that was just very clear to me that that's a place that Jeff should go back and forth through because it's really somewhat at the heart of Sebastopol. So
I know I kept trying to figure out where he was living based on going to Forester Park. I had the West County Health Center in my mind as maybe it's the one in Forester, but maybe it's the one that's, down on Palm Drive. I couldn't quite figure it out, but it was fun for me to, I think it'd be really cool to have actually a literary map drawn from some of these places or have your readers weigh in with where they think these places were modeled after. That's just my own kind of fun thought.
Well, where he lives, called the House Without Halls, is on Calder, one street over from the Sebastopol Center for the Arts. And there's a good friend of mine. He and his woman partner lived there for years in a house tucked way back as it is and the house was rebuilt from an old garage and didn't have any halls, just an added bedroom on the side. So that's right there. So when he goes into town, he cuts through Forester Park, Ives Park, to Sebastopol.
Or as it may be in one particular scene, to tease our listeners a little bit, he doesn't just cut through Forester Park. He ends up there for quite an experience.
Yeah, that's a little bit based on truth.
Fair enough.
I should say it's a lot based on truth. It just didn't take place in Ives Park.
Well, to our listeners who are wondering what Scott and I are going on about, you're just going to have to go out and get West County and find out for yourself. But it's one heck of a trip, I'll say that much.
Yeah, it is a trip.
So these other characters, other than Odin, other than Jeff, there's a mystery woman, Edwina Siba, who pops up in your book. What can you tell us about Edwina? Is she a woman based on someone real in Sonoma County's history, or is she just a woman from Scott's mind that you really wanted to capture the essence of this mystery?
Yeah, she's made up. The first time I saw redwood trees where the trunk had been hollowed and enough with a burn, I guess lightning strike, that somebody could actually live there. And I believe some of the natives did live at various periods in those trees in Armstrong Woods Park. It always was in my mind that, somebody could have maybe once lived in that spot. So that just stuck with me for decades. And as I was writing West County, I thought, I need somebody to live in one of those redwood hollowed out spots. And if he or she does, they're going to be odd and they're going to be unusual. And so Edwina is made up, I read a fair amount of Press Democrat archives to try to capture the language of the years that she describes. I know that doesn't help your listeners much, but I'll just say it was a long time ago. And so I make her spoken language match those times.
Well, it was really fascinating for me with Jeff Taylor and her interactions with him. And he just seems like such a naturally curious protagonist. Like he had the inciting incident which led him to find her. And I'm not going to go into too much more detail, but then he also kept going back. And that to me was like, other than a natural curiosity, there was no initial pull to go back. And so I was kind of fascinated by that, just his innate curiosity to just, oh, I'm just going to drive out to this place and see if I can find this woman again. And that's kind of what hooked me in, is trying to dig into his internal why.
Yeah, I think his internal why gets back to the youthful insecurities, the hand that for years, until this book, that was a major part of his daily life, just this damnable hand, that had been chopped. And so his impulse is really to try to reach out and help others because he went so many years himself. I won't say lost, but unsure of himself.
And I think that's a character people can relate to as well.
Yeah. I mean, Edwina is unusual, but she also, and I think she's like Jeff in this way, but she also really cares.
Mm-hmm.
She really cares about other people. I tried to make these novels not to be so tough guy slash. I tried to make the characters, they're not softies. I mean, Jeff gets in, he doesn't go a book without a fight or somebody getting
Or two.
killed.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I wanted to stay away from that stuff in the mysteries and make the people like some of the more interesting people I've come across in life. The people I've come across in life who are really just badass tough guys aren't very interesting to me. But those that are more complicated, like Edwina or Jeff, are.
Right. Now, you use this phrase in your book that I really latched onto, the West County ecosystem. You use it multiple times to describe what I took to be some of the wheelings and dealings of the characters and the ways of the residents. Was this based simply off living here for so long? Is this a real phrase you've heard people use to describe West County? Talk a little bit about your use of West County ecosystem.
Yeah, I've not heard it. To my knowledge, I made it up. All these years going out to the West County, I've come across interesting characters, or I've known them and been invited out to West County. It occurred to me the scenes at the store with Kurt Sanderson, the guy, you called it a hardware store, it's maybe a little bit more than a hardware store. It occurred to me that he would need a way to explain to Jeff, hey, you don't know what you're getting into here. And Kurt says, West County ecosystem. And once he said that in the writing of the novel, it occurred to me in my mind, I was connecting all kinds of things. There really is a kind of West County ecosystem when you get way West County, not Sebastopol, so to speak, but when you get way out there, especially north of the river, northwest part of the county, those endless winding, wonderful roads. And the people that live out there, they tend not to be nine to fivers. They tend not to pay taxes. They tend not to, follow the rules. So I was sure to put people like that in the book because they're interesting to me.
Absolutely. Now, which mystery authors have most influenced your work, and which books would you recommend to mystery-loving readers, maybe from those authors or others?
Well, I always go back to Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep. The Big Sleep was his first novel, and it's still a brilliant novel. Ross MacDonald, his real name is Kenneth Miller, writing in Santa Barbara. He wrote 3 books that are set, quote, in Hollywood, and they're all pretty good. So his protagonist is named Archer, and I would recommend a book called Archer in Hollywood, which is 3 novels by Ross MacDonald.
And as a writer, maybe out to other aspiring or current writers out there, what advice would you give to someone who wants to start writing their own novel, mystery or otherwise?
2 things: be prepared to, say, kill your darlings, throw out something you're just sure the writing is wonderful, the writing's brilliant, and maybe it is, but it doesn't necessarily work for the novel. And if you force it in there, it's not going to work. In the bigger picture, I always tell people what Truman Capote said, which is writing is rewriting. If you take the first 3 or 4 pages of West County, I don't know how many times they were written, but I'd say 30, 40, no less. And I did 6 full drafts. That's why it was 2 years between Sky Lake, the third Jeff Taylor, and this, because I just couldn't get it right. It took 6 times. So that's the advice. Other than that, everybody has his or her own voice, and you can pick things up. But the only way you pick things up is by writing it over and over. And there is a third thing. One of the biggest tips, and I don't know why people don't talk about it more, is to read your work aloud. And even better, have somebody else read your work aloud to you. Yeah, when you hear the words read aloud, it's amazing how often that's the wrong phrase. Oh, that's going too far. Oh, that's not clear. So have somebody read your work aloud to you if you're writing.
That's really great advice. I mean, obviously, when I was studying playwriting in college, we were doing playwriting workshops because these were words meant to be spoken and meant to convey dialogue, amongst characters to an audience. But for fiction writing, for poetry writing, for other forms of creative writing, that's probably something that goes overlooked a little bit.
Louise Erdrich, obviously, the novelist, she and her late husband in their earlier years, in their first, 4 or 5 books, they would, in the afternoon, they would take a walk together and they would read aloud to each other what the other person had written. She's a pro. If she did it, I know reading it aloud is well worth it.
Nice. So what's next for you, Scott? Are you working on your next novel?
I have written another book.
You've written another book. It's already in the works.
Well, because it took so darn long. Once I finally got West County finished, it took so darn long to get it out. I've written a young adult / new adult novel, and it's kind of a crossover because I think adults would read it too. It's set in 1970, and it involves racial wisecracks that lead to violence, and set in a small town in the Sierra Nevada. And so it's a small town and everybody's white, but somebody else comes into town. And also alongside all that, there's a battle going on to widen the highway in and through the town. And it would open up the area for real estate development. And half the town's for it and half the town's against it. The leading proponent is the small town's mayor. And one of the leading opponents is his daughter. And I'll just leave it at that.
So you like to write in mayors that are a little bit against the grain is the gist I'm getting. Another little tease for West County here. There's a very boisterous mayoral character. I'll just say that.
I don't necessarily do it consciously, but
well, maybe something subconsciously is, maybe there was a mayor you weren't a fan of at one point or a person in your life that you thought fit this mayoral character a little bit.
Yeah, it could be.
Who knows? Who knows what goes on the mind of Scott Lipanovich?
I'd like to mention that, people will often ask me, what's your process? What do you do every day? Do you sit down and have a cup of tea? Do you read the news? Do you play music? Those are legitimate questions, of course. But I think behind all that, you don't really know. Nope. You don't really know where it comes from. It just comes.
Yeah. Maybe from the whispers of the wind by a hidden teepee out in Sunspot.
Exactly. And then to me, the challenge is you get the whisper and you get an image and you hear a voice. And then the challenge is to keep going and over again and just make it so it just feels real to the reader.
It's almost, in my mind, like starting a fire, like stoking that flame and nurturing it and just letting it grow and seeing how big it can get.
Yeah. And sometimes the wind will come up and blow it and start another fire.
Absolutely. You never know. Well, as we're in the middle of the holiday season here and people might be looking to go out and buy a local gift, support a local author, where can people find your book?
It's at Copperfields and Sebastian, and then the wonderful little store called the Poet's Corner in Duncan's Mills.
I just heard of that store for the first time a few weeks ago. It looks fascinating.
It's about the size of a suburban bedroom, and the owner, Stephanie, and there's another woman that works with her. They're both just terrific. And I have copies there. And then the other thing, of course, is you can order a copy at any bookstore. You can go to
Right.
Barnes and Noble and they'll get it for you, and it doesn't cost anything other than the regular price of the book.
Well, to all our listeners out there, if you are looking for a nice stocking stuffer or a gift or just a book for yourself to cozy up with as we enter the December and January months here in West County, consider going out and buying West County. Dig into Jeff Taylor and what makes him so fascinating. And if you're looking for a little adventure, maybe take a drive through the winding roads to the West County ecosystem and get out to Duncan Mills, explore a unique bookshop, and pick up Scott's book. Scott, I want to say thank you so much for appearing on This Must Be the Place with me today, and I look forward to reading the rest of the Jeff Taylor novels as soon as I can.
That's kind of you. Thanks so much for having me. And I think that it's a privilege for us to live in Western Sonoma County. I now live in Central Sonoma County, but it's a privilege to live in Sonoma County. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful place. Take care. The interviews are done, which means I think it's time to crack one open. Interviews make me thirsty, and I want you thirsting for knowledge about some great beer, both local and not so local. Each week, I'll introduce you to a beer I find discussion-worthy and explain the nuances of what makes it fantastic in my eyes and why you should give it a try. And just to keep it on point, I'll even try to make sure the beer reflects the vibe or theme of the episode. After digging into an intriguing novel set in my home county, I was ready for a refreshment. You might be thinking, yes, he'll pick a West County brew for this segment. It is thematic after all. However, just like the protagonist Jeff Taylor we just heard about, I enjoy adding a little intrigue into life. That would be just too straightforward, no mystery involved. For this week's beer, I'm sipping on Giant Lands, a West Coast double IPA from Fieldwork Brewing Company. I found this beer a perfect tie-in to the scenery that Scott set in his novel. On the can are tall trees, and in my glass are big aromas of pine needles, grapefruit, and tangerine peel. It makes me feel as if I'm out in the woods exploring West County, just as Jeff Taylor did. This is a big beer, sitting at 8.5% ABV, and the type of beer built for the cold, aromatic December days. Perhaps you too want to bring some of this to the great outdoors and enjoy. Perhaps it's the perfect piney companion to decorating the Christmas tree. In either case, I just urge you to go out and snag some for yourself, which thankfully you can do very nearby, as Fieldwork Brewing Company, a longtime Bay Area staple, has recently opened an outpost in Montgomery Village in Santa Rosa. They had their soft open 2 weeks ago, and it's a great spot to sit and watch the big game or bring the family for pizza and beverages. A huge thanks to Scott for taking some time to chat with me today. If you're looking for the perfect holiday gift bundle for friends or family this season, perhaps a copy of West County and a 4-pack of Giant Lands is the perfect way to go. Both can be found at Montgomery Village at Copperfields and Fieldwork Brewing Company. Cheers from your host, and have a great week. This Must Be the Place is produced by our friends at Pod Locally, an audio platform helping local voices connect to their communities. Don't forget to like, subscribe, or comment on all your favorite podcast apps, and visit the show notes for more information, links, and resources. Look out for our next drop on Sunday. Until then, I'm your host, Alo Galinsky, saying have a great week.